Hello English 1102 friends. This is a short video guiding you through Tobias Wolff's story Bullet in the Brain. This is a short story, and I mean literally short, which makes it easy to talk about. One of the other things that makes it easy to talk about is this story basically breaks right in half. There's very clearly a paragraph in the middle that we'll look at in just a second that is the dividing line in this story, and we'll talk about what it divides. That's part of what's important to understand in this story and what makes it go in the nature and settings part of our course. This story is also really just about one character, the person who gets the bullet in the brain. There's other characters, the bank robbers, the other people waiting in line at the bank, but there's really just this one main character whose name is Anders. You follow him. The story in story time only lasts 5 or 10 minutes. He's waiting in line at the bank right before it closed, something that a lot of people don't do anymore because we have online banking. But this story came out in 1995 when most people, and often on Friday afternoons, they would go to they would have to go to the bank and either cash their check or get some money out of the bank or something like that. This is before online. This is really just a few years before online banking began to become common, but still probably 10 or 15 years before it became really common. And before that, people would do what is happening in this story, and you often see it in movies from the 80s and 90s. A bunch of people waiting in line at a bank, and then the bank gets robbed. And that's what you get, especially in the first half of this story before it jumps into the memory section of the story. And that's maybe the most important thing to understand about this story is the first half of this story is set in a bank. It is this physical setting. It is this physical space where the Anders and these other characters are waiting in line at the bank. And the bank teller does this annoying thing, which bank tellers used to be famous for doing, which is you get a bunch of people waiting in a line and then they close their line. And then the second half of the story jumps, once Anders gets shot, the second half of the story jumps into this sort of memory setting, this sort of, it's not a physical setting anymore. It's not a place, a physical place, it's a mental or psychological space where the story goes to. As the bullet is going through his brain, his mind jumps to this memory from when he was a kid. So let's jump into the story. Anders couldn't get to the bank until just before it closed. So of course the line was endless. He got stuck behind two women whose loud, stupid conversation put him in a murderous temper. He was never in the best of tempers anyway. Anders, a book critic known for the weary, elegant savagery with which he dispatched almost everything he reviewed. So almost immediately the story tells you the kind of person he is. He's just not a happy person. He's never really in a good mood. He's always on the verge of losing his temper or being annoyed about something. And one of the things you come to find out as the story goes along is his problem is he's tired of everything. Nothing feels new. Everything feels old. Everything, he feels like he's seen and done everything. Nothing ever feels fresh. Everything feels like this endless cycle of just doing the same thing he's done before. He's burned out on life. He's jaded. He's cynical, and like what he remembers at the end of the story is this moment when he wasn't like that, when he was young and things felt new and fresh. To the point, the way that everything gets on his nerves is even though he agrees with the other women who are in front of him and who are annoyed with this clerk who closes her window, when one of them complains, he turns around and is annoyed with her. So like he's just ugly to people. You know, the woman in front of Anders broke off their conversation and watched the teller with hatred. "Oh, that's nice," one of them said. She turned to Anders and added, confident of his accord, "One of those little human touches that keeps us coming back for more." Anders had conceived his own towering hatred of the teller, so he agrees with the women. He's like, it's super annoying, like it's awful that they did that. And y'all have all had this situation where you're, trying to get some customer service somewhere and you're in a long line and waiting and it's annoying. But he immediately turned it on the presumptuous crybaby in front of him. "Damned unfair," he said. "Tragic, really." She stood her ground. I didn't say it was tragic. I just think it's a pretty lousy way to treat your customers. And so he and the woman start going back and forth with each other. And what interrupts their little argument over whether to be annoyed at the bank teller or not is that the bank robbers come in and start robbing the bank. And that's what you get right here. The other man had a sawed-off shotgun. Keep your big mouth shut, the man with the pistol said, though no one had spoken a word. Oh, bravo, Anders said. Dead meat. He turned to the woman in front of him. Great script, a stern brass-knuckle poetry of the dangerous class. She looked at him with drowning eyes. And so the bank tellers are there like this is a life and death situation now. And Anders is still in the old, you know, annoyed at the world, making fun of everybody, attacking everybody, jaded with everybody. Move. There you go, Anders said to the woman in front of him. Justice is done. And this woman that they were both annoyed at now is getting yelled at by the robber. But Anders talking here, the robber notices him. Hey, bright boy, did I tell you to talk? No, Anders said. Then shut your trap. Did you hear that? Anders said, bright boy, right out of The Killers. If you don't know The Killers, it's an old movie. It's an old, like, detective mystery crime movie from the 1940s or 1950s, long before any of us were born. Please be quiet, the woman said. Hey, you deaf or what? The man with the pistol walked over to Anders. So now Anders has called attention to himself by mouthing off, by not being able to just be quiet and survive this situation. You think I'm playing games? No, Anders said, but the barrel tickled like a stiff finger, and he had to fight back the titters. And so now he just, like, he can't control himself and can't control himself being a smart aleck to other people and being condescending to other people, just thinking everything's a joke. You like me, bright boy, he said. No, Anders said, then stop looking at me. Anders fixed his gaze on the man's shiny wingtip shoes. Not up there, down here. He stuck the pistol under Anders' chin and pushed it upward till Anders was looking at the ceiling. But even then, when Anders is looking at the ceiling, this painting on the ceiling that he thinks is silly and stupid makes him start laughing. And he starts smirking, starts laughing, and the robber, who's got a gun to his head now, says, what's so funny? Nothing. You think I'm comical? You think I'm some kind of clown? And Anders burst out laughing. He covered his mouth with both hands and said, I'm sorry. And at that, the man with the pistol raised the pistol and shot Anders right in the head. And so Anders' attitude, his bad attitude, his sort of cynical attitude, his, you know, being a smart aleck and cynical to everybody finally gets him. He gets in a life or death situation where things are serious. It's not just, you know, some everyday being rude to somebody in line. It's a life or death situation, and he can't stop being the rude jerk that he's become, and it gets him killed. And then you get the paragraph that really divides the story in half. The first half is over now. The physical setting half. The place half. The bank, the place part is over. The bullet smashed Anders' skull and plowed through his brain and exited behind his right ear. So you're getting all these physical details. The bullet going through his brain, scattering shards of bone into the cerebral cortex, the corpus callosum, back toward the basal ganglia, down into the thalamus. All of those are descriptions. It's almost like an anatomy textbook of your brain. All of those are physical descriptions of your brain. But before all this occurred, the first appearance of the bullet in the cerebrum, another, you know, anatomy part of the brain, set off a crackling chain of ion transports and neurotransmissions. Again, like this, almost this sort of neurological doctor who would describe your brain this way. Because of their peculiar origin, these traced a peculiar pattern, flukishly calling to life a summer afternoon some 40 years past and long since lost to memory. After striking the cranium, the bullet was moving at 900 feet per second, a pathetically sluggish glacial pace. So you're still getting these physical descriptions, you know, the bullet moving 900 feet per second. Once in the brain, that is, the bullet came under the mediation of brain time, which gave Anders plenty of leisure to contemplate the scene that, in a phrase he would have abhorred, passed before his eyes. And so the story teaches you we're going out of physical time and physical space and into brain time and brain space. We're going out of the physical world and into the psychological world. We're going away from, like, the brain as cerebral cortex and corpus callosum and basal ganglia. We're going into memories, into, like, the landscape of the brain. Space, not physical place. And a lot of the story gives you this. It is worth noting what Anders did not remember, given what he did remember. And a lot of this just guides you through his memories, guides you through the stuff that's in his memory space, not physical place, but in his sort of memory the landscape of his memory. And it's all these things that he did not remember. He did not remember his first lover. He did not remember standing just outside his daughter's door as she lectured her bear about his naughtiness. He did not remember a single line of the hundreds of poems he had committed to memory in his youth. None of these did he remember, not one. Anders did not remember his dying mother saying of his father, "I should have stabbed him in his sleep." You know, his mom saying this awful thing about his dad. He did not remember Professor Josephs telling his class how Athenian prisoners in Sicily had been released. He did not remember the surprise of seeing a college classmate's name on the jacket of a novel. So this friend of his from college publishes a book. Nor did Anders remember seeing a woman leap to her death from the building opposite his own just days after his daughter was born. So all these really memorable things, you know, his daughter being born, and his daughter as a little kid, and seeing somebody kill themselves, and these important professors that he remembers from, that he would have remembered from college. He didn't remember. He did not remember when, and then this sort of keys in on his character and teaches you who he is. He did not remember when he began to regard the heap of books on his desk with boredom and dread, or when he grew angry at writers for writing them. He did not remember when everything began to remind him of something else. That's really Anders' problem. Nothing feels new. He's lived so long and allowed himself to get so cynical that nothing feels new, nothing feels fresh. Everything just feels like, oh, I've seen it before, I've done it before. You know, everything just feels like this cycle where you're just going through the motions. And that is what has turned him into such a jerk, is his sort of, he's just annoyed at everybody and ugly and rude to the world because he's burned out. This is what he remembered. Heat, a baseball field, yellow grass, the whir of insects. Himself leaning against a tree as the boys of the neighborhood gathered for a pickup game. So the one memory that he gets before the bullet passes through his brain and kills him is this memory when he's a kid playing baseball in his neighborhood with the other kids in the neighborhood. He looks on as the others argue the relative genius of Mantle and Mays. They've been worrying this subject all summer. Then the last two boys arrive, Coyle and a cousin of his from Mississippi. Anders has never met Coyle's cousin before and will never see him again. Shortstop, the boy says. Short's the best position they is. He wants to hear Coyle's cousin repeat what he's just said, but he knows better than to ask. The others will think he's being a jerk, ragging the kid for his grammar. But that isn't it, not at all. It's that Anders is strangely roused, elated by those final two words, their pure unexpectedness and their music. What he remembers is when things felt fresh, when things felt new, when everything that he encountered day after day wasn't just old and annoying and made him feel like he had done it again. The bullet is already in the brain. It won't be outrun forever or charmed to a halt. In the end, it will do its work and leave the troubled skull behind. That can't be helped. But for now, Anders can still make time because he's still in his sort of, like the brain is going quickly through his brain, you know, 900 feet per second, the story tells you. But that's not the same as the way time works in your mind and your mental, psychological landscape. But for now, Anders can still make time. Time for the shadows to lengthen on the grass, time for the tethered dog to bark at the flying ball, time for the boy in right field to smack his sweat-blackened mitt and softly chant, "They is, they is, they is." And so what he remembers is being this young kid who was just excited about the world, and the world felt fresh, and when somebody did something out of the ordinary, it felt new and interesting. It wasn't just a thing to correct or be ugly or rude about. It felt interesting and unique. You know, experiences all felt fresh and new before he just got burned out and cynical and jaded about everything. And that's what this story is really about, is he, you know, before he dies, what the bullet does to him and for him, as much as it kills him, is reveal that he wasn't always this awful, ugly, rude person, and that there was a time in his life when things felt new and fresh before he just allowed himself to get totally burned out on everything. And so that's really what this story breaks down as. When I see you, this Anders is also a good example of an anti-hero, but we can talk about that more as a concept a different time in class, or if you've got questions about it. Anti-hero is one of the vocabulary words that's on the syllabus, and Anders is our definition of it for this class and for our purposes. But aside from that concept, that conceptual issue, that gives you an introduction to this story. Like I said at the beginning, it's not that long. but it shows you the difference between this story is organized into two sort of perfect halves: the physical half and then the mental half, or the like place half and then the psychological space half. And that paragraph where the bullet, that, you know, even that paragraph right in the middle starts with the physical stuff about it physically going through his brain, and then by the time you get to the end of the paragraph, you're into the sort of psychological stuff. And so it sort of transitions the story from the physical to the mental or the psychological. I hope that's helpful for y'all. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time.